Today's snare battle features two drums from the 1970s that would have competed against each other, and one of them was enormously successful, and the other one is, I won't say forgotten, but let's put it as a hidden gem of that era and that decade. Here we have the infamous Ludwig Supraphonic. And this is a 6.5 version, and actually this is a newer drum, but it is basically the same shell and same configuration as what would occurred in the 1970s. And this drum over here is a Rogers Super 10, and this is again is a 6.5 version. This drum dates to about 1973. And both of these drums were made in various sizes. And for example, this is a 5-inch Super 10 from Rogers. The later ones in the 75, 76 era, they switched to the Big R logo that you can see. The earlier ones like this had the Rogers script logo, I believe is visible in the front. These are a steel shell drum, and quite frankly, they were not very successful for Rogers. I think by the time that they came out with these drums, steel shells were, kind of blasé. This is an aluminum shell drum. Both are 10 lugs, and both are the same depth and everything, but the Ludwig shell, or the aluminum shell on the Supraphonic, was deemed by a lot of guys, and especially professional players, to be a better drum. Over the years, I kind of was like a lot of other people. I kind of ignored the Super 10s. They were mundane, for lack of a better word. There were a ton of imported steel shell drums. We used to call them tuna can snares. They came on inexpensive entry-level kits. And you had all kinds of manufacturers doing steel shells. This one was especially unnoticeable or unnotable because it is a seam. It has a weld on the inside, so it was a rolled shell. And oh my goodness, there were certain periods of time, even some drummers today say, oh, a seam on a shell, no, that's bad, that'll make it sound bad. Later, as time went by and I started expanding my Rogers collection, I began to grow a new appreciation for the Super 10, and I kept reading in some of the online social media groups that focused on Rogers drums, that a lot of guys were saying that the Super 10, especially in the 6.5, was the best sounding steel snare they had ever played. And so I thought it would be interesting to take a standard, one that everybody's familiar with, or most everybody's familiar with in the Supraphonic, and just sit down side by side and compare them to the steel drum. Both of these drums, same tension. I don't tune to the note, I tune to the tension. Let's let the shell produce its note at an equal setting on top and bottom heads. Both of these are from the factory, how they would have been. This drum is all original, including the original Rogers snares. So other than the heads, it's what you would have bought in 1973. This drum is all original as well, except the snare straps. I did replace those. I normally run this drum like John Bonham did with a 42-strand Gretsch snare wires on it. I put the original Ludwigs back on for this comparison. They are, I believe both of these are both 18 or 16 strand snare wires. They're not real wide, nothing really special. So let's fire them up, see how they sound. I'm going to run both of the drums wide open to begin with, and then I will adjust, we'll muffle them down a little bit. This drum has an internal muffler. In the 70s, this Supraphonic would have as well. This one, as I said, is a newer drum, so I'll have to put a gel on it to kind of equal it out, how I would play them normally. So again, wide open, and then we'll muffle them down just a little bit, dry them up. Anyway, let's get going and see how they sound. Let's dry them up now. As you can hear, and as expected, there is quite a difference between the drums, but the difference is not what I think a lot of people would expect. The tension on both heads, top and bottom, is the same. I double checked it. And you can tell that the steel shell has a slightly lower note, a lower pitch. It's a deeper snare. It rumbles a little bit more. And the Supraphonic classic snare drum, classic sound, just a wonderful instrument to play, and so many recordings. A lot of people say this is the most recorded snare drum in history, and has an extremely loyal following, as I've stated in several of my previous snare battles, and almost a standard, if you will, if such things exist in the drumming world. And in my opinion, to my ear, what I hear, the Super 10 holds its own. And for certain styles of rock, especially, an 80s cover band, maybe even going into the 90s and some of the, Pearl Jam and that grunge type of music, that lower tone, that lower rumble, I think would actually maybe mix just as well, or maybe even perhaps a little bit better. These drums are rare in the 6.5. The 5-inch ones are common, and I think if I set the 5-inch Super 10 up against a 5-inch Supraphonic, I think you would hear the same differences, basically that lower note. The Supraphonic, this one is a little bit crisper on the snare side than the Rogers is, and that can be a really good thing or not, depending again on your style of playing and what you're trying to accomplish for the gig or the session. So anyway, I wanted to compare them. These drums go from $750 all the way up to a mint one, and 6.5 would be over $1,000. These drums used, you can get very good ones for $600, $650 nowadays, maybe even a little bit less. And new, I think they're in the $750 range now. I've not priced a new one in a while. Maybe that's off, but they're not extraordinarily expensive drums. Anyway, the Rogers Super 10 to me is kind of a hidden gem. It's not a real popular drum. There weren't a lot of them made. They don't come up all that often in the used marketplace that I see, but a great snare drum. And if you like the sound of a steel shell, you want just a little bit lower pitch than a Supraphonic, and yet a very durable, very quality drum, good quality throw off, even from the 70s, it still works perfectly. This is a snare that you might want to consider, and I can understand why some guys say that this is the best sounding steel drum they've ever played. I don't have a lot of steel drums in my collection, but this is probably the best one I have. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, maybe a little bit of history in there, and I'll see y'all next time.